But he taught me a lot. In fact, he taught me so much that just this past October, I had been in touch with him. I found him through my computer. I talked to him on the phone, wrote him a letter, and this October we were going to see him, but he died before we got there. But I felt I owed so much to him that I just wanted to see him one more time. I had spent a good bit of the summer in Wildwood, and I had calluses on my feet so thick, because I never wore shoes in Wildwood, that I could really walk on gravel and a few stones and that kind of stuff. And I thought, I'll be great for the Army. Well, the first hike, those things turned up blisters. The first hike was only 10 miles. And 3 days later, you had to do it again, and my feet were still sore. But finally, an infantryman's feet get just like the cheeks of a baby. They're soft, and then you can walk like a big one. We go up to 15-mile hikes, 25-mile hikes, sometimes with a full field pack, which was about 60 pounds, sometimes with a combat pack, which was 20, 30 pounds. I used to have to know all these numbers, but I don't know them anymore. And the worst march was a 10-mile forced march that you had to run half and walk fast half, and the whole company had to cross the line at the same time. And if somebody got sick or fell out, you had to pick up his equipment and two other guys carry him, because you had to get across that line in time. And this was really tough stuff for a sheltered kid from Merchantville, New Jersey. Now, I was assigned to a cannon company. And in the cannon company, after you did your infantry training all day, you had to clean these 105 howitzers. And we cleaned them at night, and we cleaned them on weekends. This is what they look like. You had to wipe all the oil off of them, get them clean, get them shiny. That's where I learned what crocus cloth was. Put all the oil back on them again. And do that about 4 times a week. This is a shell from a 105 howitzer. I fired this shell in basic training. I didn't bring it home for combat. You had enough to carry over there. That's an actual shell. We put a projectile on it that was bigger than the shell. It would sit about that high. We had them in phosphorus, HE, which is high explosive, and armor piercing. They had 7 bags of powder in them. And when the observation post would say they wanted to charge 4, you took 3 bags out, left 4 in, and that's what you fired. We did all the infantry stuff. We did the infiltration course, we did the bayonet course, and the one we liked the best was the transition course, where they had a village, and people would pop up at the windows and the doors, and you weren't supposed to shoot the civilians, and you were supposed to shoot the soldiers. And we did that one from the hip. And that was the one we liked the best. We had to throw a grenade in a window, all those neat things. And we never had any ear protection. We never thought, we never knew that was going to make you deaf. If you go to a cannon company reunion now and 10 men are sitting around a table, there's only 2 kinds of people there. The ones with hearing aids and the ones that need them. There's nobody in the middle. I got transferred to the 26th Division somewhere around June. And that was this YD. I had to start making friends all over again, which was not easy for me. I was kind of an introvert. And they put me in G Company. G Company, that's a heavy weapons infantry company. My job was to carry the ammunition for a Browning automatic rifle. Now I knew where heavy came from, carrying that darn ammunition, because that gun held 20, I think, rounds in a clip, and they were the same rounds as one. And that was really a job. try to get back into Canning Company. So I had a West Point officer, platoon leader, and I didn't have a nerve to talk to him. But after about 2 weeks, I got my nerve up, and I said, Lieutenant Hall, I said, you know, I trained in a Canning Company. I said, I think I'd be more valuable to the Army than a Canning Company. And he says, I'll check on it. And I thought, well, that's the end of that. But 2 weeks later, I got transferred to the Canning Company. No doubt in my mind, that was miracle number one in my life. I was instrumental in saving my life. When we got there, the general, we called him Gangplank Paul. He was getting us ready to go overseas. Every Friday you had to take a 25-mile hike, and if you didn't make the hike, you didn't get a weekend pass. And if you did make the hike, you didn't need the weekend pass. And there I went to Camp Shanks and went overseas on a boat called the Argentina. It had been a pleasure cruise boat. Had, I forget how many bunks, 6 or 8 bunks. Just about enough room if you turned over and didn't have wide hips, you could not hit the guy in the top bunk. You got 8 hours in the bunk, then you had to get out so somebody else could get in. And you had to stay on the deck. We had Navy food, not much better than Army food. You had to stand up, had a pole, round table around it, you set your mess kit on it, and you ate standing up. We had submarine scares all the time, but actually the submarines were on the defensive by then. This was, let's see, this was September 44, I guess, 44. And we didn't really have any submarine attacks, and the whole convoy never really did. But there were 12 days getting there, which is, you know, a long time nowadays. We landed on Omaha Beach, famous beach, because the ports were not ready. We were the first troops to land directly in France. When you stood on the deck of that Argentina and looked down at that little landing craft, that thing really looked little. And it's bobbing. The Argentina didn't bob much. That was a big boat. You climb down a cargo net with your full field pack, 60 pounds, your rifle, and your duffel bag. And if you slipped and fell between that landing craft and that Argentina, that was curtains, you just crushed to death. Nobody in our outfit did that I know of, and I made it down safe, but that's a shaky experience. The landing craft got enough up on the beach that we got on the beach without getting our feet wet. The engineers, of course, have been there before. So this is not D-Day, this is September. D-Day was in June. And they had it stringed off with little poles and little white pieces of cloth, just like you keep people off your lawn. You were supposed to walk in there. American GI is a nosy guy. So we have a guy who has to go check a building, see if there's anything worth looting, I guess. Set off a mine. 2 medics went up to help him, set off another mine. 3 guys got killed within a half hour of us landing on them. And that taught us in a hurry. We better play the hook or off and get. They took us to the hedgerows, which have been famous, and we set up in tents, because we were not really near any action. But there were dead Germans in the foxholes in the hedgerows, there were destroyed tanks, some American equipment destroyed. And every night, just before dusk, a heavy fog would roll. If you didn't have your gun in your tent, undercover, well, that fog got on that thing and you just had to clean it every night. So that was really some experience. But we were in reserve for the Battle of Brest. They didn't need us, and we never got into combat in that thing. The Canning Company had this 105 howitzer, and we stayed one terrain feature behind the lines. If this would be the lines, and this would be no man's land, and this would be our lines, we would be back here behind some trees or behind behind some houses, railroad embankment, and we would fire over. So we were relatively in a safe position compared to the line company infantrymen. We had about a 3-mile range for the cannon. We were very accurate within a mile. So consequently, we tried to stay somewhere between a mile and 2 miles from the front lines. At night, we had to set up perimeter guards because the German patrols would come in at night and try and find us, especially if we'd been shelling them during the daytime. They'd try and locate us so they could shell us at night. We were always in artillery range. We were almost always in mortar range. And occasionally we'd be in small arms range, but not very often. We went on a line in a little town called Zenj-Lapete. It was a little farm village, maybe 400 or 500 people. We were set up on the woods. The infantry was on the other side of the woods. And we shelled the heck out of that town. I went back there on the 50th anniversary, and they showed pictures of what we had done to destroy that town. This was southern France, this was not Germany. They closed the schools, they met our bus, they gave us a lunch, they had World War II Army vehicles, they took us in those vehicles up to the woods, showed us where some of our foxholes were, they had a mine detector, or a metal detector, and they actually came up with some shell fragments, some empty casings, and different things. And they treated us to lunch. When we got all done, they said they had one lady who had been there during the war. I think she was 94 years old and couldn't come out to see us. So we took the bus around to her house, and some of the guys went out, and she came out on her porch, and they kissed her and all that. It was really very moving. This is a little farm town, still a little farm town, and they gave us all one of these medals of appreciation. We really destroyed the town. We often fought with the armor. If you read anything about the 3rd Army, Patton never mentions the infantry. He only mentions 4th Armor, 10th Armor, 11th Armor, occasionally some tank battalion. The armor couldn't get started unless the infantry opened up a hole for it. And sometimes the infantry rode the tanks, but you never know anything about that. Our first experience was with the 4th Armor. We were going to relieve them because they would go back, regroup. But this one night we were there together. So we said, well, you guard this perimeter, we'll guard this perimeter. We started getting shelled, and the tanks started up and left. Well, they left us with an open perimeter there, and we were afraid of getting run over by the tanks. When you're in a foxhole, you're supposed to be safe from a tank. And we had done that in basic training. When they went over us, they went over with the tracks right over the middle of your foxhole. Well, we didn't really want to try it for real combat. So from then on, we never trusted the tanks. We set up our own perimeter and stayed away from them. We were in a place near our court. I had dug a 2-man slit trench. We dug slit trenches usually. Slit trench would be just a square. Foxhole was a step in it for firing. Joe Roach and I always dug our holes together. He was a big, handsome guy. It had been raining. It rained like dickens for the first couple months we were over there. And we put our shelter half, just laid it across the top to keep some of the rain out. And we woke up in the morning. It was spent. I doubt that it would have severely injured us because it had come down by gravity. But it scared the dickens out of Joe Roach. He wouldn't come out of the hole. So for 2 days, I carried food to him. I thought I was doing him a favor. And I could see he was getting worse instead of better. He was shaking and all. So I had to turn him in. They took him back. back to the hospital for a couple of months, sent him back. The company commander, we really had a decent company commander, put him in the kitchen. Because the kitchen was relatively safe. It was usually a couple more miles back. A couple months later, darn it, the kitchen doesn't get hit by an artillery shell.